This is what will happen to our society if young people stop having kids.
Oh my god, you guys. Okay, let's see today's flavor of fear-mongering.
Stand it for a second. Take it in. Is this what you want to see?
Look at what? What I see is a park that hasn't been kept up. I hate to break it to you, but kids all around the world play on playgrounds that look like that. A playground or a park looking like that isn't usually the mark of there not being children in the vicinity. It's usually a mark of the community not prioritizing Parks and Rec. There's literally 7 whole seasons of a comedy show that talks about how common this is. It also made the mistake of showing that this park has tennis courts and a roller skating area. When it comes to tennis, you don't really see little kids playing tennis on tennis courts very often. It's usually adults, maybe teens. And especially these days, plenty of adults roller skate and rollerblade. As a lot of muscly men have complained about on this app, women over 40 will do any kind of exercise besides weightlifting and cardio. Some of them choose roller skating. You bring up later that most of the community in the neighborhood that you're filming in are 65 and older. You know what's super popular with the 65 and older crowd? Pickleball. If the community were truly dedicated to the citizens that currently live there, those tennis courts would be kept up and possibly converted into a pickleball court. It also doesn't really make sense to assume that it's lack of children that caused this park to fall into disrepair, because I'm sure at least some of the 65 plus people who own and or live in those houses have grandchildren. You're complaining about younger generations not having kids. Well, people who are 65 and older aren't part of those generations. So most of them probably had kids. And despite what you think, plenty of millennial and Gen Zs are having kids. It would be quite far-fetched to think that none of the residents of those houses have grandchildren come over. And of course, use that playground. However, let's pretend that this area, which I assume is in the suburbs, truly did not keep up this park because there was a lack of children to use it. That's a very isolated incident. I live in New York City, which is full of playgrounds that are full of children every single day. New playgrounds are built here all the time and are full of children once they're completed. So clearly there's not a shortage of children everywhere. You just essentially walked through the neighborhood version of an old folks' home and wondered where all the kids are. And one final point on the second sentence of this video. If y'all want kids to play outside, stop calling CPS on kids playing outside. It's become far too common for a kid to be playing in their own yard, front or back, and some Karen who is passing by calls CPS because they believe the child is being neglected. And of course, if the parents in these situations are fit, nothing ultimately comes of it. But aside from it being a huge waste of time, it can cause the very children you're trying to protect anxiety. From this article, the woman smiled condescendingly and explained that he was outside and he was alone and she was returning him safely to stay inside with an adult. Then there was another knock at her door. It was a police officer. The police officer asked if my son had been outside alone. He asked why I thought it was okay for him to be unsupervised. He was about 50 feet away from his front door. I thought I had screenshotted this part of the article, but basically, because this woman's 6-year-old had watched all of this happen, later that night he had trouble falling asleep, probably from the anxiety, and he told his mom that he was worried that the police were going to come because he couldn't fall asleep.
Years ago, this was a roller rink where kids roller skated, and you could find dozens of them every weekend.
Does this guy live in this neighborhood? How does he know what it looked like and how many kids were playing in the playground 20 years ago?
Alligator. The good thing is I'm not in some sort of abandoned neighborhood like in the Midwest Rust Belt where everyone left because of bad economics.
My dude, I have some bad news for you. This neighborhood may still be occupied, but it's largely due to bad economics that people aren't having kids and buying houses. And people love to say that kids aren't actually that expensive, but those same people will also complain when parents take advantage of things like WIC. And if having kids wasn't that expensive, why would WIC need to exist? But it does exist, which hints that not all families have the same level of income or the same access to necessities, etc. People also assume that everybody's children are able-bodied and neurotypical, but it's just a fact that family A might have 4 healthy children and they can say that kids aren't that expensive. But family B might only have 1 child, but that child is high need, perhaps needing round-the-clock care. Maybe they need various treatments and therapies several times a week. You're gonna try and tell family B that kids aren't that expensive when they have to see a different specialist every other day? For many families with sick or disabled children. It's not just a matter of being frugal or clothing your children in hand-me-downs.
All the houses that surround the tennis court, the basketball court, the roller rink, they're all full of people. But their average age is 65 years old. They bought these houses 20, 30 years ago, and no new families moved in because people in this country stopped having kids.
Okay, first, the way that you've laid this situation out anyway, these houses are already occupied. So wondering why people with kids haven't moved in is kind of pointless, because there's an obvious reason why new families haven't moved into those houses. It's because people are already living there. Do you think that people only live in a house until a new set of parents knock on the door and say, "Hi, we just had a new baby, we'd like to move in here now"? And your obsession with filling these houses with children rather than seniors is a little ageist. For boomers who can afford to move and choose to stay in those houses, it's because they want to stay there. Why do you want them to leave? And for boomers who can't afford to move, what would you have them do? Why should they leave the house that they probably own and have lived in for decades just because you want kids to live there? Again, ageist. As far as why people aren't buying those houses from boomers, millennials aren't avoiding buying houses because they don't have kids. They're avoiding buying houses because they can't afford them. And you know what makes it even harder to afford a new house? Kids. Again, you can say kids aren't expensive until you're blue in the face, but your bank account says otherwise, and your bank account says you have to choose between daycare and a new house.
So if you don't want your country, your town to look like this in 10, 20 years, in 20 years this place might even be abandoned because the average age is 65.
I highly doubt this will be the case. Statistically, it's likely that most of the boomers who live in these houses have kids. And given the economic status of most of their children, it's possible that once those boomers die or move into nursing homes, because yes, most Western parents go to nursing homes, they will leave or sell the house to their children, millennials and Gen X. But they also might need to sell the house to pay the medical bills that come with advanced age. You really need to get it through your head how poor most of us are. If you're not poor, that's amazing and I'm happy for you, but the situation is way more nuanced than you're making it out to be.
You don't want it to look like this, and especially if you have the money, you gotta have some kids, because that's what powers society is going forward.
But even if you don't have the money and you're starving on your own, have kids! They don't cost anything! Sir, if you want people in America to have more kids, the government has all the power and all the solutions. They can make it easier to have kids. They can make this country a safe place to have children, starting from birth all the way up until they graduate high school. They can make resources for children, from diapers to daycare, more affordable. They can work on improving the economy so that kids born today can actually have a shot at retirement, unlike the rest of us. They can keep abortion legal so that an unhealthy pregnancy can be terminated and that person can try again to have a healthy pregnancy. You know, instead of being forced to carry like a poisonous pregnancy and then losing their fertility and any chance of ever having a family. Because you want more kids, right? So rather than making a video wondering why people aren't having kids, pay attention. Listen to parents. Us child-free people have done that. The government should, and you should. The decisions being made by the government are several of the main reasons why the birth rate is going down. You're mad at the wrong group.